What was life actually like in the world before the flood? For generations, we have imagined a primitive landscape, simple people living brief lives in crude shelters, waiting for judgment to fall. But reality was different, stranger, more complex than the Sunday school images suggest. The world that perished beneath the waters was not undeveloped. It was ancient, populated, and operating under conditions we struggle to comprehend. In this video, we are not speculating. We are observing what the biblical text actually describes and what that world required. Stay until the end, because what you discover may fundamentally alter how you read the opening chapters of Genesis and strengthen your understanding of God's character revealed there. We have imagined cave dwellers and scattered tribes, but the text describes something else entirely. 10 generations stretched from Adam to Noah. Lifespans recorded in Genesis chapter 5 average over 900 years. Adam lived 930 years. Seth, 912. Methuselah, 969. These were not symbolic numbers meant to convey importance. They were years lived, children raised, knowledge accumulated across centuries. The text also records metallurgy, cities, musical instruments, organized agriculture. Genesis chapter 4 names Cain as a city builder, Jubal as father of those who play harp and flute, Tubal-Cain as forger of bronze and iron. This was not primitive survival. This was civilization. But understanding the people requires first understanding the world they inhabited. The environment before the flood operated under different rules than ours. Genesis chapter 2 verse 5 states that the Lord God had not sent rain on the earth. Instead, streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Water rose from below, not above. A mist system sustained vegetation. No rain clouds, no storms, no violent weather as we know it. The atmospheric conditions created a greenhouse effect, uniform temperature, stability across the entire planet. What grows when water comes consistently from beneath? Dense vegetation. Lush plant life. An earth covered in green abundance, nourished without the unpredictability of weather patterns. Animal life flourished in optimal conditions. Sizes reached potential we no longer see. Varieties thrived without the environmental pressures that followed. The physical stage was set. A world greenhouse, protected, stable, abundant. Time moved differently there, not in its passage, but in its weight. 900 years of personal experience meant knowledge accumulated without generational loss. Adam lived until Methuselah was 243 years old, direct eyewitness testimony spanning nearly a millennium. The gap between Eden's expulsion and Noah's birth was not ancient myth passed through countless retellings. It was living memory, spoken from those who were there to those who would carry it forward. In a world where time moved this slowly, where lives stretched across centuries, what became of humanity? Understanding the environment is only the beginning. To grasp what life was truly like, we must enter the experience of a single human being, what it meant to wake each day in a body that would not fail, in a world that seemed like it would not end. The body did not betray. For centuries it remained strong, reliable, an instrument that answered every demand without complaint. Strength did not fade at 40, vigor did not decline at 80. At 300 years old, a man could still plow fields, lift stones, father children. The body healed quickly, recovered fully, endured without the creeping weakness we now accept as inevitable. Women bore children not just in their youth, but across lifetimes we cannot fathom. Genesis records this plainly. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated. Long life sustained, and with it, the capacity to do, to build, to master. But longevity was never merely physical. It transformed what humans could know and accomplish. Consider what happens when a craftsman has not 50 years to perfect his trade, but 500. When a musician can spend centuries exploring sound, when a metalworker has generations to understand fire and ore. Skills that now take a lifetime to approach mastery could be perfected to levels we have never witnessed. Jubal became the father of all who play the harp and flute. Tubal-Cain forged bronze and iron. These were not casual hobbies pursued in spare moments. They were life's work stretched across time we cannot imagine. Knowledge did not need to be written down and rediscovered. It was spoken directly from master to student, from father to son, from the one who pioneered a technique to the one learning it 3 centuries later. The inventor still lived. The original witness still spoke. Adam himself survived until Methuselah was already 243 years old. And the gap between Eden and Noah's birth spanned not distant mythology, but living memory, passed mouth to ear through men who overlapped across the centuries. There was no forgetting, no loss, no need to reconstruct what ancestors knew. The chain remained unbroken. What does time mean when you possess 800 years of it? Patience becomes something else entirely. Urgency dissolves into a future that stretches beyond horizons. Decisions made at 100 years old carry consequences you will personally witness at 700. Experience accumulates not across a single human lifetime, but across epochs. Memory becomes vast. Patterns emerge that shorter lives could never perceive. The weight of personal history grows heavier with each passing century, shaping judgment, hardening perspectives, reinforcing choices made long ago. Yet more time did not guarantee more wisdom. It offered more opportunity. Opportunity to grow, opportunity to learn, but also opportunity to corrupt, to harden, to perfect not virtue, but vice. Lamech boasted of violence, his words preserved in Genesis. If a man could spend decades becoming skilled in music, he could spend centuries mastering cruelty. Skills refined over lifetimes could serve any purpose. The same longevity that allowed technological brilliance permitted moral darkness to compound, to deepen, to become systematic. By the time Noah was born, humans had lived this way for over 1,000 years. And the verdict was clear. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The potential of extended life had twisted into something God himself would soon judge unbearable. But humans did not live in isolation. Extended lifespans created family structures and social bonds unlike anything that followed. Great-great-great-grandparents did not exist as distant memory. They sat at the table, spoke with authority, governed the household. Family structure extended not across 3 generations, but across 10, 15, sometimes 20, living at once. Patriarchs with 600 years of experience ruled over descendants they had watched being born centuries earlier. Authority did not pass to the next generation because the previous one rarely died. Power accumulated in hands that never released it. Genesis chapter 5 provides more than genealogy. It maps social overlap. Adam lived 930 years, his son Seth 912. Enosh, 905. The pattern continued. Adam was alive when Lamech, Noah's father, was 56 years old. This means Noah could have heard about Eden from someone who walked out of it. The chain was not broken by death. It stretched, uninterrupted across the centuries. Traditions became immovable. What had been done for 500 years would be done for 500 more. The household was not a temporary arrangement. It was an institution spanning lifetimes we cannot comprehend. But households were not isolated. Population grew. With women bearing children across centuries of fertility and with death arriving only after 900 years, the mathematics become staggering. Starting with 2 people, exponential growth over 1,656 years produces numbers we struggle to accept. Conservative estimates suggest millions. More aggressive calculations reach billions. The earth was not empty wilderness dotted with scattered families. Genesis chapter 4 records that Cain built a city. Cities require population, organization, infrastructure. The world before the flood was filled, not barren. And Genesis chapter 6 verse 11 states plainly that the earth was filled with violence, not isolated incidents, not random acts, systemic, pervasive, organized violence. When populations concentrate and patriarchs rule for centuries, power structures calcify, wealth accumulates, influence compounds. Those who held authority at 200 years old still held it at 700. There was no natural transfer, no generational reset, no opportunity for change from below. The text introduces enigmatic figures. Genesis chapter 6, verses 2 through 4 mention the sons of God taking daughters of men as wives. Their offspring were the Nephilim, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. The precise meaning remains debated, but the pattern is clear. Physical might, combined with moral corruption. Warriors or tyrants, giants in stature or influence, they represented something dangerous. Power without restraint, strength without righteousness. The breakdown was complete. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 records the Lord's assessment. He saw that the wickedness of the human race had become great on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Not some inclinations, not most people. Every inclination, only evil, all the time. In this world of accumulated corruption, violence as system, and patriarchs who would not die, one man stood apart. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9 states that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. What made Noah different? How did righteousness survive in a civilization saturated with wickedness? The answer reveals not just Noah's character, but the nature of what that world had become. But what did this world actually produce? What did humans build, create, and leave behind? Genesis chapter 4 provides the catalog. Agriculture appeared with Cain and Abel. Cities followed when Cain built one and named it after his son Enoch. Jabal became the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock, establishing organized animal husbandry. Jubal followed as father of all who play the harp and flute, creating musical culture. Tubal-Cain forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron, mastering metallurgy. This was not primitive survival. This was specialization, innovation, the foundation of civilization. And it happened early, recorded within the first few generations after Eden. Consider what extended mastery produces. A craftsman today might spend 50 years perfecting a skill, reaching the edge of what one lifetime allows. But 500 years? The difference is not incremental, it is categorical. Tubal-Cain did not apprentice for a decade and then practice for 30 more. He worked metal for centuries. The techniques he developed, the understanding of heat and ore and hammering, the innovations in tool-making, all refined across time we cannot imagine. Jubal explored sound for lifetimes. Musical instruments did not appear and remain static. They evolved under hands that never stopped experimenting, never stopped discovering new acoustic possibilities. Agriculture sustained dense populations, which means it was not simple gardening, but sophisticated farming. Soil management, crop rotation, irrigation from the mist system, selective breeding of plants across generations. Animal husbandry operated similarly. Centuries to observe, breed, refine herds. The ark itself reveals the technological ceiling. Genesis chapter 6 records its dimensions: 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, 3 decks, rooms throughout. A structure this massive required mathematics, engineering, material processing, and waterproofing techniques. Wooden ships this large were not built again until the 19th century. This was not a primitive raft. It was an achievement requiring knowledge we often assume ancient people lacked. But advancement did not equal virtue. Technology served any master. The same metallurgy that created farming tools created weapons. Bronze and iron could forge plows or swords. Skill refined over centuries could be applied to destruction as easily as construction. Lamech's boast in Genesis chapter 4, verses 23 and 24 makes this clear. He killed a man for wounding him, a young man for injuring him. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. Violence was not hidden. It was celebrated, systematized, turned into culture. The mighty men, the Nephilim, represented this union of capability and corruption. Physical strength without moral restraint. Power without righteousness. Genesis chapter 6 verse 11 states that the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence, organized oppression spanning centuries, systems of injustice maintained by patriarchs who never died, no external threat to unite against. Violence turned inward, human against human, the strong preying on the weak for generations without end. Culture saturated, wickedness normalized, every inclination of every thought only evil continually. Advanced civilization producing not enlightenment, but deeper darkness. In this world, advanced, populated, and utterly corrupt, God looked down and saw that judgment could not be delayed. But before the waters rose, there was warning, and one man heard it. God spoke to Noah with terrible clarity. Genesis chapter 6 verse 13 records the declaration. I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. The instruction followed immediately. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Specific dimensions, exact measurements, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high, 3 decks, rooms throughout, a roof, a door in the side, coated inside and out with pitch. Build it to survive what has never happened. Noah was 480 years old when God commanded this. He would be 600 when the flood came. 120 years stretched between the warning and the water. The challenge was not merely spiritual, but intensely practical. Gathering timber required labor. Cutting, shaping, transporting massive beams demanded organization. The ark was not a weekend project. It was a century-long construction, every cubit a statement, every plank a sermon to a world that had never seen rain. Genesis chapter 6 verse 22 records Noah's response simply. Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Faith, requiring not a moment of decision but decades of sustained obedience. Every day returning to work while neighbors watched, mocked, continued their lives unchanged. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 5 calls Noah a preacher of righteousness. 120 years of testimony. The ark itself preached. Its growing frame declared judgment coming. But the response was indifference. Life continued exactly as before. Matthew chapter 24 verse 38 records Jesus describing this. People were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Normalcy bias at civilizational scale. It has never happened. Therefore it never will. Rain had never fallen, floods had never risen. Why would they start now? The warning multiplied opportunity. Thousands saw the construction, heard the message, calculated the odds, and chose to ignore them. Then Genesis chapter 7 verse 16 records the moment that ended all choice. Then the Lord shut him in. 8 people inside, the rest outside. The door closed not by human hands, but by God himself. What was destroyed was not small. Entire cities vanished. Accumulated technology disappeared. Written records, if they existed, dissolved in the water. Populations numbering potentially millions or billions perished. Knowledge refined over centuries was lost. Metallurgical techniques, agricultural innovations, musical achievements, architectural understanding, all erased. Genesis chapter 7 verse 22 states plainly that everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. But the loss was not merely practical. Beauty vanished alongside corruption. Instruments fell silent, buildings collapsed, cultures dissolved. The totality was complete, yet the necessity was absolute. Corruption had become so total that even impressive achievement could not redeem it. Genesis chapter 6 verse 6 records that the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. God grieved. The judgment was not casual. It was surgical removal of evil so metastasized that continuation meant permanent contamination. 8 people preserved, animals saved, seeds protected, enough to begin again, but only just. When the waters receded and Noah stepped onto dry ground, everything had changed. The world that emerged from the waters was fundamentally different. Genesis chapter 8, verse 22 records God's promise. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. Seasons appeared, weather patterns began. Rain fell from above instead of mist rising from below. The atmospheric canopy that once protected the earth had collapsed. The greenhouse was gone. Temperatures varied, climates diversified. The uniform conditions that sustained such long life disappeared. Lifespans declined rapidly. Noah himself lived 950 years, born before the flood, carrying the old biology into the new world. But his descendants showed immediate reduction. Shem lived 600 years. Arphaxad, 438. Peleg, 239. By Abraham, 175. Moses, 120. David, 70. The trajectory was unmistakable. Something in the environment had shifted. The human body, no longer sustained by pre-flood conditions, began its faster decline toward the limits we now accept as normal. Genesis chapter 9, verse 3 introduced another change. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Permission to eat meat, granted after the flood, suggests environmental necessity. Perhaps vegetation was less abundant. Perhaps nutrition was less dense. The dietary shift points to a world operating under new constraints. Genesis chapter 9, verse 2 adds that the fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth. The relationship between humans and animals was altered. What had been was no longer. But God also established covenant. Genesis chapter 9, verse 13 records the sign. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. The rainbow, produced by sunlight through rain, became possible only in the post-flood world. It marked both judgment past and promise future. New world, new terms, new beginning. 8 people carried forward all that remained. Civilization restarted from nearly nothing. Technology had to be relearned, reapplied, rebuilt without the centuries to master it that the previous world enjoyed. Humanity was humbled, brought low, made to remember dependence on God. Understanding this matters deeply. Genesis makes more sense when we grasp the world it describes. God's patience, demonstrated through 120 years of warning, magnifies his justice when judgment finally fell. Noah, as preacher of righteousness, prefigures all prophets and ultimately Christ. When Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 37, that as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man, he meant something specific. He pointed to a world advanced but corrupt, warned but indifferent, continuing in normalcy until the door closed and judgment arrived. We see in that lost world what humanity does with time, ability, and freedom. We see God's character revealed in grief over necessary judgment. We see the cost of corruption compounding across lifetimes. We see the mercy of limits. Our shorter lives, perhaps grace rather than curse. We see the pattern of decisive divine action when evil becomes total. And we see hope in the remnant that even in the worst conditions, God preserves the faithful. The parallels to our moment are unavoidable. We possess technological capability without corresponding moral progress. We advance in power while remaining unchanged in character. Civilization does not exempt from judgment. It never has. The call remains what it was in Noah's day. Be righteous in a corrupt generation. Live faithfully when surrounded by compromise. Heed the warning while the door remains open. The world before the flood is gone. The world we inhabit is passing. But the God who preserved Noah through judgment remains faithful. His offer of salvation still stands, and his word, given then and repeated now, has never failed. What surprised you most about the world before the flood? What does understanding this lost civilization teach us about our own time? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to continue this journey through biblical history. And until the next Video, may God strengthen your faith and deepen your understanding of His Word.